The fire pit at the center of the pack grounds roared under the full moon, and every eye in the crowd was fixed on Elena as she stepped forward to claim her mate. Her hands trembled, but her smile was wide and honest, the smile of someone who had waited her whole life for this single moment. Across the circle stood Damon, tall and broad-shouldered, his jaw tight, his eyes refusing to meet hers. She thought it was nerves. She thought wrong. The pack elder raised his hand for silence, and the crowd of wolves, some in human form and some already shifting with excitement, quieted at once. Drums stopped. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Elena walked to the center, her bare feet pressing into the cool grass, and reached out to take Damon's hand the way tradition demanded. He stepped back. A gasp rippled through the crowd like a wave crashing against rock. Elena froze, her hand still stretched out, empty air where his fingers should have been. For a moment she thought she had misunderstood, that maybe he needed one more second to gather himself. She smiled again, softer this time, encouraging. "Damon," she whispered, so only he could hear. "It's all right, I'm here." He did not answer her. Instead, he turned his head toward the edge of the crowd, and Elena followed his gaze before she could stop herself. There stood Sabrina, her closest friend since childhood, wrapped in a shawl the color of midnight, her eyes glassy with tears that did not match the horror spreading across every other face in the clearing. "I reject you, Elena," Damon said, his voice carrying across the silent grounds. "I choose Sabrina as my mate." The words hit her like ice water thrown across bare skin. For one heartbeat, nobody moved. Then the whispers began, low and sharp, spreading through the crowd like fire jumping from branch to branch. Elena's ears roared with the sound of her own blood rushing, drowning out every voice, every gasp, every cruel murmur that followed. She looked at Sabrina, waiting for her to deny it, to say this was some horrible mistake, that she would never do this to her best friend. Instead, Sabrina lowered her eyes and stepped closer to Damon, closing the distance between them until their shoulders touched. That was the moment Elena understood. This had not happened by accident. This had been planned, whispered about in corners she had never seen, built in secret while she trusted the two people closest to her in the world. Her knees buckled. Someone in the crowd reached out to steady her, but she pulled away before the hand could land, some deep instinct screaming at her not to be touched, not to be pitied, not in front of everyone who had come to witness her happiest night turn into her worst. The pack elder tried to speak, tried to offer some kind of ceremonial closing to soften the blow, but Elena was no longer listening. She turned and ran. Branches tore at her arms as she fled into the tree line, her formal dress catching on thorns, ripping at the hem, but she did not stop. She did not look back at the fire, at the crowd, at the two faces that had betrayed her in front of everyone who mattered. She ran until the sounds of the pack faded into nothing but wind, and her own ragged breathing. Rejection was not just embarrassment among wolves. It was a wound that cut deeper than skin, a break in the bond that had already begun forming between mates, a tearing away of something that had been growing since the day they were both born. Elena felt it now, a hollow ache spreading through her chest, as though something vital had been ripped out and left in the open air. She did not know how long she ran. Time became meaningless, measured only in the burn of her lungs and the sting of tears she refused to let fall. The forest around her grew unfamiliar, the trees taller, the air colder, carrying scents she did not recognize. She had crossed into territory that did not belong to her pack, territory she had been warned about since she was a pup. Her legs finally gave out near a shallow stream, and she collapsed onto the mossy bank, her chest heaving, her vision blurring at the edges. She pressed a hand against her ribs, trying to hold herself together, trying to remember how to breathe normally. The water beside her moved gently, indifferent to her pain, and for a long moment, she simply lay there and let the tears come. She cried for the years of friendship she thought had been real. She cried for the future she had imagined with Damon, the pups they had once joked about naming, the home they had promised to build together on the edge of the packlands. She cried because she had believed, truly believed, that she was loved. And now she understood that belief had been a lie, dressed up in kindness. A twig snapped somewhere behind her. Elena's head shot up, every muscle in her body tensing at once. Rejected mates were vulnerable in ways most wolves never had to think about. The bond, even broken, left a scent trail that predators and rival packs could sense from a distance, like blood in water. She was alone, unprotected, and deep in territory she did not know. "Who's there?" she called out, forcing steadiness into her voice even though her hands were shaking. No answer came, only the soft rustle of movement in the underbrush, circling rather than approaching. Elena rose to her feet slowly, ready to shift if she had to, though exhaustion made her body feel heavy and slow, far from the quick reflexes she usually relied on. Two shapes emerged from the shadows between the trees, wolves larger than any she had seen from her own pack, their fur dark and sleek under the moonlight. They did not growl or bare their teeth. Instead, they watched her with an unsettling calm, heads tilted slightly, as though trying to decide what to make of her. "I mean no harm," Elena said, taking a small step back. "I didn't mean to cross into your land. I'll leave." One of the wolves shifted into human form with a fluid grace that spoke of years of practice. He was young, perhaps her own age, with sandy hair and sharp eyes that studied her with more curiosity than hostility. "You're bleeding," he said simply, nodding toward her arm where the branches had torn her skin during her flight. Elena glanced down, surprised to see the thin lines of red she had not even noticed. "It's nothing," she said, though her voice wavered. "You smell like a broken bond," the second wolf said, also shifting into human form. She was older, her expression harder to read, but not unkind. "That kind of wound doesn't heal on its own out here. You need to come with us." Elena hesitated. Every instinct told her to refuse, to keep running, to trust no one after what had just happened at her own pack's fire. But her legs were trembling from exhaustion, her wounds stung more than she wanted to admit, and the forest around her held dangers she was in no condition to face alone. "Where would you take me?" she asked. "To our king," the sandy-haired man said. "He'll decide what happens next. But first, you need care. You won't make it through the night otherwise." The mention of a king sent a ripple of unease through her. She had heard stories, the kind whispered around fires late at night, about the Lycan king who ruled the territories beyond her pack's borders, a wolf so powerful that entire packs bent the knee to avoid his wrath. Some stories painted him as cruel. Others painted him as untouchable, a leader who had never once shown mercy or warmth to anyone beneath his rule. She had no other choice. Her body was failing her, and the night was only growing colder. "All right," she whispered. "I'll come." The two wolves flanked her as they walked deeper into unfamiliar territory, moving with a quiet authority that told Elena they were used to being obeyed without question. She kept her eyes forward, trying not to let her fear show, though every part of her wanted to collapse and simply stop existing for a while. They walked for what felt like hours, the forest slowly giving way to a clearing where torches lined a wide stone path leading toward a fortress unlike anything Elena had ever seen. It rose out of the earth like it had grown there naturally, its walls dark and ancient, covered in ivy that seemed to shimmer faintly under the moonlight. Guards stood at intervals along the wall, their postures rigid, their eyes sharp as they tracked the newcomer's arrival. "This is his territory," the woman said, noticing Elena's wide-eyed stare. "You'll be safe here, as long as you don't cause trouble." Elena swallowed hard and nodded, though safety felt like a strange word to use in a place that radiated so much quiet power. She followed the two wolves through the gates, past guards who watched her with unreadable expressions, and into the fortress itself. Inside, the halls were lit with warm torchlight, the stone floors polished smooth by centuries of footsteps. She caught glimpses of tapestries depicting battles long past, symbols of a royal lineage stretching back further than she could imagine. This was not just a pack. This was a kingdom, ruled by a bloodline whose power was legend even among wolves who had never seen it firsthand. They led her to a small chamber near the healer's quarters, where an older woman with kind eyes and steady hands examined the cut on her arm and the exhaustion written across her face. The healer worked quietly, cleaning the wound with practiced efficiency, occasionally glancing at Elena with a curiosity she did not bother to hide. "You carry the scent of a broken bond," the healer murmured, echoing what the wolf in the forest had said. "That kind of pain runs deep. It will take more than herbs to mend it." Elena said nothing, staring down at her hands, still faintly stained with dirt from her flight through the forest. "Rest now," the healer continued, wrapping a clean cloth around the wound. "The king will want to see you when you wake. He does not take kindly to strangers wandering his lands uninvited, but he is fair. You'll be given a chance to explain yourself." The words offered little comfort, but Elena was too exhausted to argue or ask further questions. She allowed herself to be guided to a small bed near the healer's chambers, the sheets soft and unfamiliar against her skin. As she lay down, her mind replayed the scene at the fire pit over and over. Damon's cold rejection, Sabrina's guilty eyes, the crowd's shocked silence. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, whether the king would show her mercy or cast her out into the wilderness again. But for the first time since she had begun running, exhaustion finally won over grief. and her eyes slipped closed. Somewhere deep within the fortress, in a chamber far grander than the one she now rested in, a man stood at a window overlooking the moonlit grounds, his sharp eyes catching a faint scent that had drifted in on the night air, a scent that stirred something in him he had not felt in centuries. He did not yet know her name. He did not yet know what she meant to him, but something ancient and long dormant inside him had just begun to wake. With the weight of her past finally beginning to loosen its hold, Elena turned her full attention toward the life unfolding in front of her. She began spending more time among the Ashgrove pack itself, no longer content to remain simply a healing guest within the stronghold's walls. She wanted to understand the people she might one day stand beside as their queen, and she wanted them to understand her in return. Marcus, initially cautious around her given his loyalty to Alaric and his uncertainty about her role within the pack, became one of her earliest allies. He offered to train with her once her strength had fully returned, recognizing quickly that Elena was not the kind of wolf content to simply stand at the king's side without purpose of her own. "You fight well," Marcus commented one afternoon, watching her recover from a training exercise with practiced ease. "Better than most who arrive here as outsiders." "I trained hard at Hollow Pine," Elena said, wiping sweat from her brow. "I wanted to be useful to my pack, not just decorative." "That mindset will serve you well here," Marcus said approvingly. "Ashgrove respects strength paired with purpose. You'll find our pack far less concerned with where you came from than with what you choose to do now that you're here." Elena took his words to heart, dedicating herself to learning everything she could about Ashgrove's customs, its history, and the responsibilities that would eventually fall to her if she chose to fully accept the bond the mark represented. She spent mornings training alongside warriors, afternoons studying pack law and history under the guidance of Ashgrove's eldest advisors, and evenings continuing her deepening conversations with Alaric, each day bringing new understanding between them. The pack, initially curious and cautious about the outsider who carried such a significant mark, slowly began to warm toward her as they witnessed her genuine effort to understand and contribute, rather than simply accept a position of privilege. Younger wolves began seeking her out for advice, drawn by her willingness to listen without judgment. Older members of the council found themselves impressed by her sharp understanding of pack politics, quick to grasp complexities that had taken others years to fully appreciate. "You've made quite an impression," Alaric told her one evening, finding her exhausted but satisfied after a long day of training and study. "The council speaks of little else these days." "Good impression, I hope," Elena said, allowing herself a small, tired smile. "The best kind," Alaric assured her. "They see someone earning her place, not simply claiming one." Elena appreciated the distinction, understanding instinctively how important it was, both to herself and to the pack she hoped to eventually call her own. She had watched, during her time at Hollow Pine, wolves who assumed positions of privilege without ever truly earning the respect that should accompany such standing. She refused to become one of them, regardless of what fate had written into her skin. As weeks passed, Elena's bond with Alaric deepened steadily, built not on the sudden intensity of a single dramatic moment, but on the slow accumulation of shared understanding, mutual respect, and growing trust. They found themselves seeking each other out more frequently, no longer needing excuses or coincidences to justify time spent together. It was during a quiet walk through the stronghold's northern gardens, beneath a sky heavy with early evening stars, that Alaric finally spoke words neither of them had dared voice clearly before. "I do not simply want you as my queen because fate demands it," he said, stopping beneath an ancient willow tree that marked the garden's quiet center. "I want you because of who you have shown yourself to be these past weeks. Strong, thoughtful, unwilling to accept anything you have not earned. Fate may have marked us as bound together, Elena, but it is you, specifically, that I have come to care for." Elena felt her breath catch at the sincerity in his voice, something warm and overwhelming rising in her chest. "I feel the same," she admitted quietly. "I came here broken, unsure if I could ever trust anyone again. You never once tried to rush that trust. You let me find my own way back to believing in something good." Alaric reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to step back if she wished, and gently took her hand in his. The mark on her wrist seemed to warm slightly at the contact, a quiet confirmation of everything fate had already known, before either of them fully understood it themselves. "I am ready," Elena said softly, meeting his eyes with a steadiness that surprised even herself. "Not because fate demands it, but because I choose it. I choose you, and I choose this life, freely and completely." Something shifted in Alaric's expression, relief and joy blending together in a way Elena had never seen from him before. 300 years of careful composure giving way, just for a moment, to something unguarded and deeply human. "Then let us tell the council," he said, his voice thick with quiet emotion. "Let us begin preparing for what comes next." Elena nodded, feeling the weight of the decision settle over her, not as a burden, but as the first true step toward a future she had never imagined possible only weeks ago. Whatever challenges still waited beyond Ash Grove's walls, whatever political complications her new status might invite, she felt ready to face them, standing beside a partner who had earned her trust through patience, rather than demanded it through position. News of their decision spread quickly through the stronghold, met mostly with celebration among the pack members who had watched Elena's transformation over the past weeks with growing respect and affection. Preparations began almost immediately for what would become one of the most significant events in Ash Grove's long history, the formal claiming of a fated queen after 3 centuries without one. But not everyone within reach of Ash Grove's growing influence celebrated the news with equal enthusiasm. Elena woke to sunlight filtering through a narrow window, the warmth touching her face like a hand she did not expect. For a moment she forgot where she was, her mind still tangled in dreams of fire and drums and Damon's voice cutting through the crowd. Then the ache in her arm reminded her, sharp and real, and the memories came flooding back all at once. She sat up slowly, testing her strength. The wound on her arm had been cleaned and wrapped tightly, and though it still stung, the deep exhaustion from the night before had eased into something more manageable. A simple dress had been laid out for her on a chair near the bed, plain but clean, far different from the torn gown she had worn to her own rejection ceremony. A soft knock came at the door before it opened. The healer from the night before stepped inside, carrying a tray with bread, fruit, and a cup of something warm that smelled faintly of herbs. "You're awake," the healer said, setting the tray down on a small table. "Good. You'll need your strength today." "Why today?" Elena asked, her voice still rough from sleep and tears. "The king wishes to see you," the healer replied simply, as though this were the most ordinary thing in the world. "He does not usually take interest in strays who wander into his territory, but something about your arrival caught his attention. I would not keep him waiting, if I were you." Elena's stomach tightened. She had heard enough stories about the Lycan king to know that being summoned by him was not something to take lightly. She ate quickly, more out of necessity than hunger, and dressed in the plain clothes provided, trying to steady her nerves as best she could. Meanwhile, far from the fortress, in the pack she had once called home, the morning after the rejection ceremony brought its own storm of whispers. The clearing where the fire had burned the night before was empty now, the ashes cold, but the gossip had spread through every household before the sun had fully risen. She just ran, one wolf murmured to another as they crossed paths near the training grounds. Didn't even fight for herself, just turned and disappeared into the trees. "Can you blame her?" another voice answered. "Rejected in front of the whole pack, and by her own best friend's doing. I heard Sabrina had been meeting Damon for months before the ceremony." Inside the modest home Damon now shared with his mother, Sabrina sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea she had not touched. Damon paced near the window, his expression tight with something that looked almost like regret, though he refused to name it. "She'll come back," Sabrina said quietly, though her voice lacked conviction. "Or she won't. Either way, it's done now. We can't take back the ceremony." "I keep thinking about her face," Damon admitted, running a hand through his hair. "The way she looked at me before I said it. Like she trusted me completely." "You made your choice," Sabrina snapped, sharper than she intended. Guilt was beginning to gnaw at her, though she refused to let it show. "We both did. There's no use dwelling on it now." But dwelling on it was exactly what the rest of the pack seemed intent on doing. Elders spoke in hushed tones about the dangers of a broken bond left unresolved, the way it could weaken a pack's collective strength if not handled properly. Some worried about omens, about what it meant for 2 wolves to betray their intended in such a public and cruel manner. Others simply pitied Elena, wondering where she had run to and whether she had survived the night alone in unfamiliar territory. None of them knew that she had already found shelter, however uncertain, within the walls of a fortress that answered to a king more powerful than any of them had ever encountered. Back within the stone halls of that very fortress, Elena was led by 2 guards through corridors that grew grander with every turn, until she reached a set of tall wooden doors carved with intricate patterns of wolves in mid-stride, chasing something unseen across the grain of the wood. The guards pushed the doors open, and Elena stepped into a throne room bathed in morning light. The room was vast, its ceilings high enough to make her feel small, its walls lined with banners bearing a crest she did not recognize, a wolf's head surrounded by a circle of stars. At the far end, seated upon a throne carved from dark wood and inlaid with silver, sat the man she had sensed the night before without ever seeing his face. He was younger than she expected for someone with such a fearsome reputation, though his eyes carried the weight of centuries rather than years. His dark hair was cut short and neat, his posture rigid with the kind of authority that came from a lifetime of command. When his gaze landed on her, something flickered across his expression, gone so quickly she almost missed it. "You crossed into my territory uninvited," he said, his voice low and even, carrying easily across the room without needing to be raised. "State your name and your reason for being here." Elena straightened her spine, refusing to let her voice shake despite the nerves twisting in her stomach. "My name is Elena. I did not mean to trespass. I was fleeing my own pack after a rejection ceremony went badly. I did not know I had crossed into your lands until your wolves found me." A murmur passed among the small council seated near the throne, though the king himself remained still, his sharp eyes studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away, and yet somehow kept her rooted in place. "A rejection," he repeated, as though testing the word. "Your mate rejected you, and you fled rather than face your pack afterward." "He rejected me for my best friend," Elena said, her voice tightening despite her efforts to remain calm. "In front of the entire pack, I had nowhere else to go." Something shifted in the king's expression, a flicker of something that might have been anger on her behalf, though it vanished before she could be certain she had seen it correctly. He rose from his throne, descending the few steps toward her with slow, deliberate movements, and Elena forced herself to hold her ground even as every instinct told her to step back. "I am Alaric," he said when he finally stood before her, close enough now that she could see the faint gold flecks scattered through his otherwise dark eyes. "King of these lands, and every wolf who calls them home. You are fortunate my scouts found you before something worse did." "I'm grateful," Elena said honestly. "I didn't ask to be brought here, but I understand it likely saved my life." Alaric studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, though something in his posture had shifted subtly since he first spoke to her, a tension she could not quite name settling into his shoulders. He circled her slowly, the way a predator might study something unfamiliar, though there was no cruelty in the gesture, only careful assessment. "You may stay within my territory until you've healed," he said finally, returning to stand before her. "After that, you will need to decide whether to return to your pack or seek shelter elsewhere. I do not take in strays permanently without reason." "Thank you," Elena said, bowing her head slightly out of respect, though something about his tone left her uncertain whether this was mercy or simply practicality. As she turned to leave, escorted by the same guards who had brought her in, Alaric remained standing near his throne, his eyes following her until the doors closed behind her. The moment she was gone, his composed expression cracked slightly, revealing something far more unsettled underneath. "My king," one of his advisors said carefully, stepping closer. "Is something wrong?" "That scent," Alaric murmured, more to himself than to the advisor standing nearby. "I have never encountered anything like it before." The advisor frowned, glancing toward the doors Elena had just walked through. The rejected wolf? She seemed ordinary enough, aside from her circumstances. "Nothing about her is ordinary," Alaric said quietly, his gaze distant as he tried to make sense of the strange pull he had felt the moment she stepped into the room, a pull he had convinced himself centuries ago he would never experience. He had long since accepted that fate had passed him by, that his throne would remain without a queen beside it, yet something about this broken, grieving stranger had stirred instincts he thought long buried. He said nothing further, dismissing his advisors with a wave of his hand, and remained alone in the throne room long after the sun had climbed higher in the sky, turning over questions he was not yet ready to voice aloud, even to himself. Elsewhere in the fortress, Elena settled into the small chamber she had been given, unaware of the storm of thoughts she had left behind in the throne room. She sat by the window, watching wolves train in the courtyard below, their movements sharp and disciplined, nothing like the more relaxed rhythms of her old pack. She thought of home, of the pack she had left behind, of Damon and Sabrina, and the life she had once imagined for herself. For the first time since the ceremony, she allowed herself to wonder what might come next, though she had no way of knowing that the answer would change everything she thought she understood about fate, about love, and about the future waiting for her within these very walls. Far to the north, within the rival territory known as Blackridge, news of Elena's mark and Ashgrove's coming celebration reached Alpha Corwin Vane with growing unease. Corwin had spent years testing Ashgrove's borders, probing for weaknesses in a kingdom he had long viewed as an obstacle to his own ambitions of expanding Blackridge's influence across the region. A fated queen changed everything. If Ashgrove's king secured a bond as powerful as legend described, Corwin knew his own plans for eventual expansion would become far more difficult, perhaps impossible. A Lycan king bound to his true fated mate was said to gain strength beyond ordinary measure, a connection that stabilized not just the ruler himself, but the entire kingdom under his protection. Corwin called his most trusted advisors together within his war room, laying out his concerns plainly. "We cannot allow this bond to be completed uncontested," he said. "Once sealed, Ashgrove becomes untouchable for generations. We must act before the celebration takes place." "What do you propose?" one advisor asked carefully. "The girl," Corwin said, "Elena Hart. She is the vulnerability in this equation. Remove her from the equation, and the bond cannot be completed." The room fell into tense silence at the implication behind his words, though none of his advisors voiced open objection. Understanding the political stakes Corwin believed justified such drastic measures. "She is well protected within Ashgrove's walls," another advisor pointed out. "Direct action against her there would mean open war with a kingdom far stronger than our own." "Then we do not act within their walls," Corwin said. "We create opportunity elsewhere. Every queen eventually travels beyond her king's protection, whether for diplomacy, ceremony, or simple curiosity. We wait for that opportunity, and we act decisively when it arrives." The plan set into motion quietly over the following days, Blackridge spies embedding themselves among merchant caravans and traveling groups that regularly crossed near Ashgrove's borders, watching patiently for any sign of Elena venturing beyond the stronghold's protective walls. Their opportunity arrived sooner than expected. As part of the celebration preparations, tradition required the future queen to visit a sacred grove located just beyond Ashgrove's central territory, a place where ancient ceremonies had been performed for centuries before the current stronghold was even built. Elena's visit would require only a small escort, following customs meant to demonstrate the future queen's own personal courage and connection to the land she would one day help protect. Alaric had been hesitant about the tradition given recent tensions, but Elena had insisted on honoring it fully, unwilling to begin her new role by abandoning customs important to the pack she hoped to serve. "I'll be safe," she assured Alaric the morning of her journey, adjusting the simple ceremonial cloak draped over her shoulders. "Marcus is leading the escort himself, and it's barely half a day's journey." "I still don't like it," Alaric admitted, though he did not attempt to forbid the tradition, respecting Elena's determination to embrace her new responsibilities fully. "Stay close to Marcus. Trust your instincts if anything feels wrong." Elena promised she would, and the small escort set out shortly after sunrise, moving steadily through familiar Ashgrove territory before crossing into the quieter, less traveled paths leading toward the sacred grove. The attack came without warning, precisely timed for the moment the escort passed through a narrow section of forest where the trees grew thick enough to limit visibility and movement. Blackridge wolves emerged suddenly from concealed positions, moving with coordinated precision that immediately told Marcus this was no random ambush. "Protect the queen!" Marcus shouted, positioning himself quickly between Elena and the nearest attackers. Elena's heart pounded, old instincts rising sharply despite the surprise of the assault. She had trained hard over the past week specifically to ensure she would never again feel as helpless as she had during her earlier encounter with hostile wolves, and that training proved its worth as she moved quickly to defend herself alongside the Ashgrove escort. The fight was brutal and fast, Ashgrove warriors fighting fiercely to protect their future queen while Blackridge wolves pressed forward with dangerous determination. Elena fought alongside them, her movements sharp and controlled, refusing to become the passive target Corwin had hoped she would be. Still, the numbers favored the attackers, and Elena felt herself being gradually separated from the main group as the chaotic fight spread through the dense trees. A Blackridge wolf lunged toward her, and she barely managed to sidestep the attack, countering with a sharp strike that sent her opponent stumbling backward. "You won't win this fight," the wolf snarled, circling back toward her. "Corwin wants you removed from this equation, one way or another." Elena's blood ran cold at the confirmation that this attack was specifically targeting her, not simply a random territorial dispute. She steadied herself, drawing on every lesson Marcus and the other warriors had taught her over the past weeks, refusing to let fear overwhelm her focus. Before her opponent could press his advantage further, a powerful shape crashed through the trees behind him, moving with a speed and strength that immediately told Elena help had arrived. Alaric had sensed something wrong through the bond growing steadily between them, and he had followed with a speed that defied even his own centuries of experience. The Blackridge wolf never stood a chance against the full fury of an ancient Lycan king defending his fated mate. Alaric moved through the remaining attackers with devastating efficiency, and within minutes, the surviving Blackridge wolves retreated in chaotic disarray, abandoning their mission rather than face further losses. Elena stood breathing hard amid the aftermath, relief and adrenaline mixing uncomfortably in her chest, as Alaric reached her side, his eyes scanning her quickly for any sign of injury. "I'm fine," she assured him, though her voice still carried the tremor of the fight's intensity. "Thanks to you, and to Marcus's warriors." Alaric's expression remained tight with barely controlled anger. "This was no accident," he said. "Corwin sent these wolves specifically to target you." "I heard them say the same thing," Elena confirmed, steadying her breathing. "They said he wants me removed before the bond is completed." Alaric's jaw tightened further, understanding immediately the political calculation behind the attack. "Then we no longer have the luxury of a lengthy celebration," he said. "The bond must be completed swiftly, both for your safety and for the stability of this entire territory." Elena nodded, feeling the weight of the decision, but no longer hesitant about the path forward. Whatever danger still lingered beyond Ashgrove's borders, she felt more certain than ever that the future she had found within these walls was worth defending, whatever the cost. "Then let's not give Corwin any more chances to interfere," she said firmly. Alaric looked at her with something between pride and fierce protectiveness, and together, surrounded by the loyal warriors who had fought to keep her safe, they began the journey back toward Ashgrove, the sacred grove tradition abandoned in favor of a far more urgent priority, securing the bond that would finally make her position, and her safety, absolute and unchallengeable. Days passed within the fortress, each one blurring quietly into the next as Elena's wounds slowly began to heal. The healer checked on her each morning, pleased with her progress, though she noted more than once that grief left scars far harder to mend than torn skin. Elena said little in response, unwilling to discuss the ache that still lived beneath her ribs whenever she thought of home. She spent most of her days wandering the fortress grounds, careful to avoid drawing attention, though it proved nearly impossible in a place where everyone seemed to know exactly who did and did not belong. Guards nodded politely when she passed, though their eyes lingered a moment longer than necessary, curious about the stranger the king had allowed to remain within his walls. It was on the fourth day that she first ventured toward the training grounds, drawn by the rhythmic sound of sparring and the sharp commands of instructors correcting form. She stood at the edge of the field, watching young wolves practice combinations of strikes and holds, their movements far more refined than anything she had learned in her own pack. "You look like you want to join in," a voice said beside her. Elena turned to find a young woman about her own age, dark curls pulled back into a practical braid, her expression friendly despite the guarded way she studied Elena's face. "I used to train back home," Elena admitted. "Nothing like this, though." "Your pack trains differently." "Everything here is different," the woman said with a small laugh. "I'm Rosalind. I help oversee training for the newer recruits." "Elena," she replied, offering a small smile in return, the first genuine one she had managed since arriving. Rosalind studied her for a moment longer before speaking again. "You're the one the king brought in himself, aren't you?" "Well, not himself exactly, but you know what I mean. Word travels fast around here." Elena's cheeks warmed slightly at the reminder that her arrival had clearly not gone unnoticed. "I didn't mean to cause a stir. I was just trying to survive the night." "No one's blaming you," Rosalind said, waving off her concern easily. "If anything, people are curious. The king doesn't usually take interest in strangers. You must have made an impression." Before Elena could respond, a sharp voice cut across the training field, calling for a demonstration match between two of the more advanced recruits. Rosalind excused herself to oversee the match, leaving Elena standing at the edge of the field once more, watching the wolves move with practiced precision. It was there, an hour later, that Alaric found her. He arrived without fanfare, simply appearing at the edge of the field as though he had always been standing there, his presence somehow commanding attention without a single word spoken. The training recruits straightened instinctively, though he waved off their formality with a small gesture, his attention already drawn toward Elena. "You've taken an interest in my training grounds," he said, coming to stand beside her, close enough that she caught the faint scent of pine and something else she could not quite place, something that made her pulse quicken in a way she did not fully understand. "I used to train back home," Elena said, echoing what she had told Rosalind earlier. "It's different here, more disciplined." "Discipline keeps a pack strong," Alaric said simply. his eyes fixed on the sparring match ahead rather than on her, though she sensed his attention was not entirely on the recruits. Weakness invites danger, both from outside threats and from within. Is that why you keep such tight control here? Elena asked before she could stop herself, immediately wondering if the question had been too bold. Alaric turned to look at her then, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. Control is not the same as cruelty, if that is what you are implying. I didn't mean it that way, Elena said quickly, though something in his tone suggested she had not entirely offended him. I only meant that your kingdom seems very different from what I expected. And what did you expect? He asked, curiosity slipping into his otherwise measured tone. Stories paint you as untouchable, Elena admitted honestly. Cold, powerful, distant from the wolves you rule. But everyone here seems to respect you, not fear you. That's harder to earn than fear. Something shifted in Alaric's expression. A flicker of surprise quickly smoothed over, as though he had not expected such an honest observation from someone who had only just arrived. Respect is built over time, he said finally. Fear is easier, but it does not hold a kingdom together during difficult moments. I learned that lesson early in my rule. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the recruits finish their match, one clearly victorious over the other, though both bowed respectfully once it ended. How is your wound healing? Alaric asked, changing the subject with an abruptness that told Elena he had grown uncomfortable revealing so much of himself. Better, she said, glancing down at her arm, still faintly bandaged beneath her sleeve. The healer says I should be fully recovered within another few days. Good, Alaric said, though something in his voice suggested this news brought him mixed feelings. You'll need to decide soon what you intend to do once you've healed, whether to return home or seek shelter elsewhere. Elena's chest tightened at the reminder that her time here was temporary, that soon she would need to face the world beyond these walls once more, a world that included Damon, Sabrina, and a pack that had witnessed her humiliation. I don't know if I can go back, she admitted quietly, not after everything that happened. Alaric said nothing for a long moment, his jaw tightening slightly as though he were fighting some internal battle he did not wish to reveal. You are welcome to remain here a while longer, if returning home does not feel right yet, he said finally, his voice careful, measured. My kingdom has room for those who need it. The offer surprised her, coming from a king who had made it clear he did not typically extend such kindness to strangers. Why would you offer that? She asked, unable to hide her confusion. Alaric's gaze met hers directly then, something intense and searching in his expression that made her breath catch unexpectedly. I am not entirely certain myself, he admitted, his voice quieter now, almost hesitant in a way that seemed foreign to someone who commanded an entire kingdom without question. But something tells me you should not leave just yet. Before Elena could respond, a commotion near the far end of the training field drew both their attention. A young recruit had pushed his sparring partner too hard, tempers flaring beyond the boundaries of friendly practice, until Rosalind stepped between them, calling for order. Alaric's expression hardened instantly, the softness from moments before disappearing beneath the weight of his responsibility as king. Excuse me, he said, already moving toward the disturbance, his presence alone enough to silence the growing argument before he even reached the two recruits. Elena watched him go, her mind still turning over his words, the strange offer to stay, the intensity in his eyes that she could not fully explain away as simple curiosity. Something about their conversation had shifted something inside her, a small crack of warmth breaking through the numbness that had settled over her since the rejection ceremony. That evening, as she sat alone in her chamber picking at the meal brought to her, Rosalind appeared at her door, a knowing smile on her face that made Elena immediately suspicious. The whole training ground is talking about it, Rosalind said, settling into the chair across from her without waiting for an invitation. The king personally speaking with you, offering you a place to stay indefinitely. That's not something he does, Elena, not ever. It's probably just kindness, Elena said, though even she did not fully believe her own words. Alaric doesn't do simple kindness, Rosalind said, shaking her head. Not like that. Something about you has caught his attention, and I don't think even he understands why yet. Elena said nothing, staring down at her half-eaten meal, her mind replaying the strange intensity in Alaric's eyes when he had looked at her, the way her own heart had responded to his nearness in ways she had not expected and could not fully explain. She thought of Damon, of the bond that had been broken so cruelly, and wondered if she was even capable of trusting another connection so soon. But some quiet, insistent part of her whispered that whatever she had felt standing beside Alaric that afternoon had been different from anything she had known with Damon, deeper somehow. though she could not yet understand why, or what it might mean for the uncertain future stretching out ahead of her. The Great Hall of Ashgrove had never held so many wolves within its walls at once. Word of the attack had spread quickly, and rather than causing fear or hesitation, it had drawn the pack even closer together, united by anger at the attempted assault on their future queen, and determination to see the bond completed swiftly and completely. Elena stood in a private chamber adjoining the hall, dressed in ceremonial robes woven with silver thread that caught the candlelight with every small movement. Priya adjusted the final details of her appearance, her expression warm with quiet pride. "You look every bit the queen this pack needs," Priya said softly. "I don't feel like a queen," Elena admitted, though there was no fear in her voice, only the natural uncertainty of someone stepping into an entirely new role. "I still feel like the same person who arrived here weeks ago, wounded and lost." "Perhaps that is exactly why you'll make such a good one," Priya said. "You haven't forgotten what it feels like to be vulnerable. That understanding will serve this pack far better than distant, untested confidence ever could." Elena considered her words carefully, finding truth in them that steadied her nerves as she prepared to step into the great hall. She thought of everything that had led her to this moment, the humiliation of her rejection, the fear and uncertainty of arriving wounded in unfamiliar territory, the slow, careful trust she had built with Alaric over weeks that felt both impossibly short and remarkably transformative. She thought too of Corwin's attack, the danger that had nearly ended everything before it truly began, and felt a fierce determination settle over her in its place. She would not allow fear to define this moment. She had earned her place through strength and patience, and she intended to step forward now with exactly that same resolve. The doors to the great hall opened, and Elena walked forward into a room filled with the entire Ashgrove pack, their eyes turning toward her with a mixture of curiosity, respect, and genuine warmth that had grown steadily over her weeks among them. Alaric waited at the center of the hall, dressed in formal attire that emphasized both his authority and, Elena noticed with quiet appreciation, a subtle nervousness she found endearing given how composed he usually remained. As she approached, his expression softened into something unguarded, visible to the entire gathered pack. "Wolves of Ashgrove," Alaric began, his voice carrying easily through the silent hall. "For 3 centuries, this kingdom has waited for a truth many believed no longer existed. Tonight, that truth stands before you, not as legend, but as reality." He turned to Elena, taking her hand gently as she reached his side. "Elena Hart," he continued, "you arrived among us wounded, uncertain of your place in this world. In the weeks since, you have shown this pack strength, wisdom, and a heart strong enough to overcome pain that would have broken many others. You have earned your place here, not through fate alone, but through your own character." Elena felt her throat tighten with emotion as he spoke, the weight of his words settling deep into her chest. "Do you accept this bond?" Alaric asked, his voice steady despite the vulnerability visible in his eyes. "Freely, completely, and for as long as fate allows us both to walk this world together?" "I do," Elena said, her voice clear and unwavering, carrying easily through the silent hall. "I accept this bond, and everything that comes with it, not because fate has written it into my skin, but because I choose you, freely and completely." The mark on her wrist flared bright with silver light as she spoke the words, and a matching light appeared on Alaric's own wrist, the 2 marks pulsing in perfect unison as the ancient bond finally completed itself after centuries of waiting. A wave of warmth spread through Elena's chest, unlike anything she had felt before, a deep, unshakable connection settling into place, permanent and unbreakable in exactly the way Alaric had once described. She looked up at him, seeing her own overwhelming emotion reflected back in his eyes. The great hall erupted into celebration, wolves throughout the gathering howling in unified approval, the sound rising into the night sky above Ashgrove's ancient walls, carrying news of the completed bond far beyond the stronghold's borders. Alaric pulled Elena close, and for a long moment, the noise of the celebration faded into the background as they simply held each other, both finally allowing themselves to feel the full weight of everything they had overcome to reach this moment. "You are my queen now," Alaric murmured softly, only for her to hear, "fully, completely, and without question." "And you are my king," Elena answered, "not because fate demanded it, but because you earned it, every single day since I arrived here broken and afraid." Word of the completed bond reached Blackridge territory within days, and Corwin, upon hearing that his attempt to prevent it had ultimately failed, understood immediately the political disaster his actions had caused. An attack on a fated queen, now successfully bonded to her king, invited consequences far more severe than any territorial dispute he had previously provoked. Ashgrove's council moved quickly to address the aggression, and Corwin found himself facing unified condemnation from packs throughout the region, his reputation and standing severely damaged by an attack that had ultimately achieved nothing beyond exposing his own desperation. At Hollow Pine, news of the completed bond reached Damon and Sabrina through the same channels that had once carried whispers of Elena's mark. Damon read the announcement quietly, feeling a complicated mixture of relief and lingering regret settle over him. Whatever guilt he continued to carry from the night of the rejection, he found himself, for the first time, genuinely hoping that Elena's new life would bring her the happiness his own choices had failed to provide. Sabrina, too, absorbed the news with quiet reflection, understanding that whatever path her own life would now take alongside Damon existed entirely separate from the extraordinary fate Elena had found. She did not know if their bond would prove as strong or lasting as the one now sealed between Elena and her king, but she resolved, quietly, to build whatever future she could from the choice she had made, rather than continuing to measure it against a fate that had never truly belonged to her. Within Ashgrove, the celebration continued long into the night, but eventually, Alaric guided Elena away from the gathered crowd, out into the quiet gardens where their bond had first begun to grow weeks earlier. They stood together beneath the same ancient willow tree where he had first spoken openly of his feelings, the stars bright and clear above them. "Do you regret any of it?" Alaric asked quietly. "The rejection, the pain that brought you here?" Elena considered the question carefully before answering. "I regret the pain," she said, "but I don't regret where it led me. If Damon had never rejected me, I would never have found you. Sometimes the worst moments in our lives lead us toward the best ones, even if we can't see it while we're living through them." Alaric pulled her closer, resting his forehead gently against hers. "Then I am grateful for every painful step that led you here," he said softly, "because it brought me the one thing I waited 3 centuries to find." Elena smiled, feeling complete in a way she had never imagined possible during the darkest hours of her rejection. Whatever challenges still waited ahead for the newly bonded king and queen of Ashgrove, she faced them now not as a wounded, discarded girl, but as a woman who had rebuilt herself into something far stronger than she had ever been before. The moon shone brightly over the stronghold that night, silver light spilling across ancient stone walls that had waited 300 years for exactly this moment. Elena Hart, once rejected and cast aside, now stood as fated queen beside a king who had waited centuries to find her, their bond a testament to the truth that sometimes the greatest beginnings rise from the ashes of our deepest heartbreaks. And as the celebration continued around them, neither Elena nor Alaric doubted, even for a moment, that whatever future awaited them, they would face it together, exactly as fate, and their own choices, had always intended. The following days brought a strange rhythm to Elena's life within the fortress, one she had not expected to settle into so easily. Mornings began with quiet walks through the gardens behind the healer's quarters. Afternoons found her watching training sessions from the edges of the field, and evenings often ended with unexpected encounters with Alaric himself, conversations that grew longer and less guarded with each passing day. She told herself these meetings meant nothing beyond simple courtesy, that a king checking on the well-being of a guest within his territory was hardly unusual. Yet she could not deny the way her pulse quickened whenever she heard his footsteps approaching, or the warmth that spread through her chest whenever his rare smile broke through his otherwise composed expression. One evening, she found him standing alone near the edge of the fortress walls, looking out over the darkened forest beyond, his posture less rigid than she had seen it during official matters. She hesitated before approaching, unsure whether to intrude on what appeared to be a private moment. "You can join me," he said without turning, somehow sensing her presence before she had made a sound. Elena stepped closer, coming to stand beside him at the wall, the cool evening air brushing against her skin, as she looked out over the same view he had been studying. "It's beautiful here," she said softly. "Different from home, but beautiful in its own way." "I find it calming," Alaric admitted, his voice quieter than usual. "There are few places within these walls where I can simply exist without the weight of ruling pressing down on me. This is one of them." "Being king must be exhausting," Elena said, glancing at him with genuine curiosity. "Everyone depending on you, every decision carrying so much weight." "It is," he agreed, surprising her with his honesty. "More than most realize. My father ruled before me, and his father before him. I was raised knowing this responsibility would eventually fall to me, yet nothing truly prepares you for the isolation that comes with it." "Isolation?" Elena repeated, tilting her head slightly. But you're surrounded by your entire kingdom. How could you feel isolated? Alaric turned to look at her then, something vulnerable flickering behind his usually guarded eyes. Being surrounded by many is not the same as being truly known by anyone, he said quietly. Most who approach me do so out of duty, or fear, or ambition. Few speak to me simply because they wish to understand who I am beneath the crown. Elena felt something tighten in her chest at his words, recognizing an echo of her own loneliness within them, though shaped by entirely different circumstances. I understand that more than you might think, she admitted. Everyone in my old pack knew me as Damon's intended mate, or Sabrina's closest friend. I'm not sure anyone ever asked who I was outside of those roles. And who are you? Alaric asked, his voice low and genuinely curious. Outside of those roles. The question caught her off guard, and she found herself struggling to answer honestly, realizing she had never truly considered it before. I don't know anymore, she admitted after a long pause. I spent so long building my future around Damon that I forgot to build anything just for myself. Perhaps that changes now, Alaric said, something gentle in his tone that made her chest ache in an entirely different way than the grief she had grown used to carrying. They stood together in comfortable silence for a while longer, the forest below settling into the deep quiet of night, until Alaric finally spoke again, his voice hesitant in a way she had not heard from him before. I must confess something, he said, his eyes fixed on the horizon rather than on her. Since the night you arrived, I have felt something I cannot fully explain, a pull toward you that defies logic, given how little we truly know of each other. Elena's breath caught, her heart pounding loudly enough that she wondered if he could somehow hear it. I've felt it too, she admitted quietly, the words slipping out before she could stop them. I told myself it was simply gratitude for your protection, but it feels like something more than that. Alaric turned to face her fully now, his expression open in a way she had never seen from him before, stripped of the careful composure he wore during official matters. I do not understand it myself, he said honestly. I have ruled for many years without ever experiencing anything close to this. I had accepted long ago that fate had passed me by, that I would rule alone until the end of my days. And now? Elena asked softly, hardly daring to hope for whatever answer might follow. Now I find myself questioning everything I believe to be settled, Alaric admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I do not wish to overstep, given what you recently endured. Your wounds from that rejection are still fresh, and I would never wish to add confusion to your grief. Elena appreciated his restraint, recognizing the careful respect behind his words even as her own heart raced with feelings she did not fully understand. Thank you for saying that, she said. It means more than you know, especially after everything with Damon. They remained by the wall a while longer, neither quite ready to end the conversation, though both seemed to sense the need for caution, given the fragile nature of what was beginning to grow between them. Eventually, Alaric walked her back toward her chamber, their conversation shifting to lighter topics, stories of his childhood within the fortress, small details about the kingdom she had come to temporarily call home. As she lay in bed that night, staring up at the ceiling, Elena found herself smiling for the first time in what felt like ages, a genuine warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with grief or loss. Whatever this strange pull between herself and Alaric meant, it felt entirely different from what she had known with Damon, steadier somehow, built on honesty rather than assumption. The following morning, however, brought an unexpected disruption to the fragile peace she had begun to find. A messenger arrived at the fortress gates just after dawn, requesting an urgent audience with the king, carrying news that Elena would not learn the full details of until much later that day. She noticed the shift in atmosphere immediately, guards moving with heightened alertness, whispered conversations cutting short whenever she approached. Rosalind found her near the gardens shortly after midday, her expression troubled in a way that immediately set Elena on edge. What's happened? Elena asked, setting down the book she had been attempting to read without much success. A messenger arrived from a neighboring territory, Rosalind said carefully, choosing her words with obvious caution. There's word that a nearby pack has been causing trouble along the border, testing our defenses. The king has called an emergency council meeting. Is it serious? Elena asked, though something in Rosalind's expression suggested the answer was more complicated than a simple border dispute. It might be nothing, Rosalind said, though her tone lacked conviction. But there have been rumors circulating about a pack seeking to challenge the king's authority for some time now. If this is connected, it could mean trouble for the whole kingdom. Elena's stomach twisted with unease, though she reminded herself this was not truly her concern. that she remained only a temporary guest within these walls, however strong the connection growing between herself and Alaric had become. Still, she found herself worrying for his safety throughout the rest of the day, her mind returning again and again to their conversation from the night before. It was late evening before she saw him again, exhaustion evident in the tight set of his shoulders as he made his way through the fortress corridors. She hesitated before approaching, unsure whether he wished to be disturbed after what had clearly been a difficult day. "You look troubled," she said softly, falling into step beside him as he walked. "Border tensions," Alaric said, his voice tired but controlled. "Nothing my council cannot handle, though it will require careful attention in the coming days." "Is there anything I can do?" Elena asked, surprising herself with how genuinely she meant the offer. Alaric paused, turning to look at her with something soft, breaking through his exhaustion. "Simply having you here helps more than you might realize," he admitted quietly. "These halls feel less heavy since your arrival." The confession warmed her chest despite the uncertainty hanging over the kingdom's borders, and she found herself hoping, however cautiously, that whatever storm approached would not tear apart the fragile connection they had only just begun to build. 3 days after the messenger's arrival, the tension along the border finally spilled over into something Elena could not ignore. She had been walking near the eastern edge of the fortress grounds, close to a section rarely visited by guests, when she heard raised voices carrying from beyond the outer wall. Curiosity pulled her closer, though caution kept her steps quiet as she approached the source of the commotion. Through a gap in the stone wall, she spotted a group of unfamiliar wolves standing just beyond the fortress boundary, their postures aggressive, their leader shouting demands toward the guards stationed along the perimeter. "Tell your king that Marcus Thornwood does not fear him," the stranger called out, his voice carrying easily across the open ground. "Tell him our pack will no longer bow to boundaries drawn by his ancestors. These lands belong to whoever proves strong enough to hold them." The guards remained firm, refusing to engage beyond calling for reinforcements, though Elena could sense the barely restrained aggression radiating from both sides. She knew she should retreat, that this was not her fight, that involving herself could only complicate matters further. Yet something about the stranger's tone, the casual threat woven through his words, made her chest tighten with an instinct she could not ignore. Before she could decide what to do, one of the intruding wolves broke away from the group, moving with alarming speed toward a gap in the fortress defenses that Elena realized with horror led directly toward the section where younger recruits often trained unsupervised during afternoon hours. She did not think, she simply moved, cutting through the gardens toward the training grounds, shouting warnings as she ran, praying she would reach the recruits before the intruder did. Her heart pounded with adrenaline as she burst through the hedges bordering the training field, finding several young wolves scattered across the grass, utterly unaware of the danger approaching from beyond the wall. "Get back to the main hall," Elena shouted, waving her arms urgently. "Now, all of you, move." The recruits scattered at her command, confusion quickly giving way to obedience as they registered the urgency in her voice. Elena positioned herself near the gap in the wall, her body tense, ready to shift if necessary, though she knew facing a trained intruder alone carried significant risk. The stranger appeared moments later, larger than she had anticipated, his eyes narrowing with surprise at finding someone blocking his path rather than the vulnerable recruits he had expected to encounter. "Move aside," he growled, his voice carrying clear menace. "This does not concern you." "These are children," Elena said firmly, refusing to step back despite the fear coursing through her veins. "Whatever quarrel you have with this kingdom, it has nothing to do with them." The intruder's expression twisted with irritation, clearly unprepared for resistance from someone he likely assumed posed little threat. He lunged forward, testing her resolve, and Elena reacted on pure instinct, shifting mid-movement into her wolf form and meeting his attack with a defensive strike that sent them both tumbling across the grass. The fight that followed was brief but fierce, Elena drawing on training she had not used in weeks, her body remembering movements ingrained since childhood even as fear threatened to overwhelm her focus. She managed to hold her ground, buying precious time, until the sound of heavier footsteps signaled the arrival of proper reinforcements. Alaric arrived within moments, his expression thunderous as he took in the scene before him. Elena locked in combat with an intruder who had clearly underestimated her resolve. He moved with terrifying speed, separating the two combatants with a force that sent the intruder skidding backward across the grass, clearly startled by the sudden appearance of the kingdom's ruler. "Enough," Alaric commanded, his voice carrying an authority that silenced everything else around them. The intruder, recognizing the futility of continuing his assault against the king himself, retreated hastily back toward the wall, disappearing beyond the boundary before reinforcements could fully surround him. The moment the immediate danger passed, Alaric turned toward Elena, his expression shifting from fury toward something closer to panic as he took in the sight of her, breathing hard, a shallow scratch along her collarbone from the brief scuffle. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his hands hovering near her shoulders as though unsure whether touching her was permitted, his composure cracking in a way Elena had never witnessed before. "I'm fine," she assured him, though her voice trembled slightly from the adrenaline still coursing through her system. "The recruits are safe. That's what matters." As Alaric reached forward to examine the scratch along her collarbone, checking for deeper injury beneath the torn fabric of her dress, his fingers brushed against skin just below her shoulder, and he went suddenly, completely still. Elena followed his gaze downward, confused by his reaction, until she saw what had caught his attention, a faint mark, silver in color, shaped like an intricate crest she did not recognize, had become visible along her collarbone where the fabric had torn during the confrontation. She had never noticed it before, had certainly never seen it during any of her previous injuries or examinations, yet there it lay, unmistakable against her skin. "What is that?" she asked, reaching up to touch the mark herself, feeling nothing unusual beneath her fingertips despite its strange, almost luminous appearance. Alaric said nothing for a long moment, his expression a mixture of shock and something that looked almost like disbelief. His eyes fixed on the mark as though he were seeing something impossible made suddenly real. "Alaric," Elena said again, growing concerned by his silence. "What is it? What does that mark mean?" He finally looked up at her, meeting her eyes with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. "That mark," he said slowly, his voice unsteady in a way she had never heard from him, "only appears on one person in every generation. It is the mark of a true fated queen, the destined mate of whoever holds the throne of this kingdom." Elena's mind reeled, struggling to process what he was telling her. "That's not possible," she whispered, shaking her head. "I'm not royalty. I come from an ordinary pack, nothing special about my bloodline at all." "The mark does not care about bloodline," Alaric said, his voice growing steadier as the initial shock began to settle into something closer to overwhelming realization. "It appears only when true fate has chosen someone, regardless of birth or circumstance. I have searched for this mark my entire life, Elena, convinced I would never find it. But I was already rejected once," Elena said, panic creeping into her voice as the weight of his words began to sink in. "How could fate choose me for something this significant, after everything that happened with Damon?" "Perhaps that rejection was never truly meant to succeed," Alaric said quietly, reaching out to gently touch the mark once more, his fingers trembling slightly against her skin. "Perhaps fate simply redirected you toward where you were always meant to be." Elena stared at him, overwhelmed by the sudden shift in everything she thought she understood about her circumstances, about the strange pull she had felt toward this man since the very night she arrived, wounded and broken, within his territory. The pieces began falling into place with a clarity that left her breathless, the inexplicable connection, the way her heart had responded to his presence from their very first meeting. All of it suddenly making sense in a way she had never anticipated. "I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't need to say anything yet," Alaric said gently, his composure returning even as something deeply emotional lingered behind his eyes. "This is a great deal to absorb, especially given everything you have already endured. But know this, Elena, whatever comes next, I intend to honor what fate has revealed, carefully, and with the respect you deserve." Around them, the training grounds had grown quiet, the recruits who had witnessed the brief confrontation now watching from a respectful distance, sensing that something significant had just occurred, though few understood the full weight of what had been revealed. Rosalind stood among them, her expression a mixture of shock and quiet excitement as she pieced together what the mark's discovery truly meant for the future of the kingdom she had served faithfully for years. As the sun began to set behind the fortress walls, casting long shadows across the training grounds, Elena found herself standing at the edge of a truth far larger than anything she had imagined when she first fled into the forest that fateful night. Whatever came next, she understood now that her path had led her here for reasons far beyond simple chance, and the realization left her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and cautious, fragile hope. News of the mark spread through the fortress faster than Elena could have anticipated, whispered from guard to guard, recruit to recruit, until by the following morning nearly everyone within the walls seemed to know that the king had found his fated queen. Elena felt the weight of every glance that followed her through the corridors. curiosity mixed with something like reverence that made her deeply uncomfortable. "You don't have to face all of this alone," Rosalind said, finding Elena seated near the gardens later that morning, staring at nothing in particular, her mind still spinning from the revelation of the day before. "I know it's overwhelming. Believe me, none of us expected this either. I don't know how to be what everyone suddenly expects me to be," Elena admitted, wrapping her arms around herself despite the mild warmth of the morning sun. "Yesterday, I was just a wounded stranger seeking shelter. Today I'm supposed to be a queen." "You don't have to become anything overnight," Rosalind said gently, settling onto the bench beside her. "Fate revealed the mark, yes, but that doesn't mean anyone expects you to transform instantly into someone else. Alaric certainly doesn't expect that, from what I've seen of him." Elena appreciated the reassurance, though the uncertainty continued to gnaw at her throughout the following days. She found herself hesitant around Alaric now, in ways she had not been before the mark's discovery, unsure how their previous easy conversations should shift, given the enormous weight suddenly placed upon their connection. Alaric, for his part, seemed equally cautious, giving her space rather than pressing the matter, though she often caught him watching her from across rooms with an expression she could not fully interpret, something between wonder and restrained longing. It was nearly a week after the mark's discovery that he finally sought her out directly, finding her in the same garden where she had first spoken with Rosalind, the late afternoon sun casting golden light across the flower beds surrounding them. "May I sit?" he asked, uncharacteristically formal given how naturally their previous conversations had flowed. "Of course," Elena said, shifting slightly to make room on the bench. They sat in silence for a moment before Alaric spoke again, his voice careful, measured in a way that told her he had rehearsed this conversation more than once. "I have given you space this past week, because I did not wish to pressure you into accepting something you are not ready for," he said. "But I feel it is time we speak honestly about what the mark means, and what it does not mean." "I'm listening," Elena said softly, grateful for his consideration, even as nerves fluttered through her chest. "The mark reveals fate's choice," Alaric explained. "It does not obligate you to accept that choice, nor does it strip away your right to decide your own future. I would never force this bond upon you, regardless of what destiny has written across your skin." "What if I want to accept it?" Elena asked quietly, surprising herself with how easily the words came once she allowed herself to voice them. "What if these past weeks have shown me something I never expected to find again, especially after everything with Damon?" Alaric turned to look at her fully then, hope flickering behind his composed expression. "Then I would consider myself the most fortunate king this territory has ever known," he said softly. "But I need you to be certain, Elena. Not because fate demands it, but because you truly wish it for yourself." "I am certain," Elena said, and found that she meant it completely, the fear that had gripped her since the mark's discovery finally settling into something steadier, something that felt remarkably like hope. "These weeks with you have shown me what real trust feels like, something I never fully had with Damon, even before everything fell apart." Alaric reached out then, gently taking her hand in his touch warm and careful, as though he still feared overstepping despite her clear words. "Then let us move forward together," he said, "at whatever pace feels right to you, without rushing toward expectations neither of us fully understands yet." The following weeks brought gradual changes to Elena's place within the fortress. She began attending council meetings alongside Alaric, observing how decisions affecting the kingdom were made, slowly learning the weight of responsibility that came with the role fate had chosen for her. Rosalind became not just a friend but something close to a mentor, teaching her the customs and expectations of court life she had never needed to know within her old pack. Elena also began training more seriously, working alongside Rosalind and other experienced fighters to sharpen skills that had grown rusty during her years focused on a future with Damon rather than her own strength. She found unexpected satisfaction in the progress, a sense of building herself into someone capable and strong, rather than simply someone waiting to be chosen. Her bond with Alaric deepened steadily during this time, built on small moments rather than grand gestures, quiet conversations during evening walks, shared meals where he asked genuine questions about her past, and listened carefully to her answers, moments of comfortable silence that required no words at all to feel meaningful. Yet even as her new life began taking shape, whispers occasionally reached her about the world she had left behind. A merchant passing through the fortress mentioned rumors of unrest within her old pack, tensions rising as some questioned the wisdom of the rejection that had driven away a wolf who was apparently destined to become a queen. Elena listened to these fragments with a strange detachment, as though they described a life belonging to someone else entirely, She wondered sometimes about Damon, whether he had heard news of what she had become, whether Sabrina still felt secure in the choice they had made together. She found, to her own surprise, that these thoughts brought less pain than she expected, the wounds from that night slowly closing beneath the steady warmth of her new life within Alaric's kingdom. One evening, as autumn began settling over the fortress grounds, painting the surrounding forest in shades of amber and gold, Alaric led her to a quiet balcony overlooking the training fields where she had first defended the young recruits, the very spot where the mark had first been revealed. "I have something to ask you," he said, his voice carrying an unusual nervousness that immediately caught her attention. "What is it?" Elena asked, studying his expression carefully. "I wish to formally announce our bond to the kingdom," Alaric said. "Not simply as a private understanding between us, but as recognition before my council and my people. I understand if you feel this is moving too quickly, but I no longer wish to keep something so significant hidden away." Elena considered his words carefully, thinking of how far she had come since that terrible night of rejection, how completely her life had transformed within these fortress walls. "I think I'm ready for that," she said finally, meeting his eyes with quiet certainty. "I want the kingdom to know, Alaric. I want to stop hiding from what fate has given us." His smile, when it came, was unlike anything she had seen from him before, unguarded, and full of a joy that transformed his usually composed features into something achingly beautiful. He reached for her hand once more, holding it gently as they looked out over the fortress grounds together, both silently acknowledging the significant step they were about to take. Neither of them yet knew that word of this decision would travel far beyond the fortress walls, reaching ears and territories both near and far, including a pack that had once cast Elena aside without a second thought, setting into motion consequences neither she nor Alaric could fully anticipate. News of the formal announcement reached Elena's old pack within days, carried by traveling merchants who spoke openly of the rejected wolf who had somehow become destined to rule an entire kingdom. The story spread quickly through every household, sparking disbelief among those who remembered her humiliation at the fire pit, and something closer to shame among those who had witnessed her rejection without speaking a single word in her defense. Damon heard the news while repairing a fence along the northern edge of the pack's territory, the words delivered by a young pup who had overheard the merchants speaking in the market square. He stood frozen for a long moment, the hammer slipping from his grip and landing softly in the grass beside him. "That's not possible," he muttered, though something in his chest twisted with an uncomfortable mixture of disbelief and dawning realization. By evening, the news had reached Sabrina as well, who received it with far less composure than Damon had managed. She sat rigid at the kitchen table, her hands trembling slightly as she processed what the merchant's story meant, not just for Elena, but for the choice she and Damon had made together on that fateful night. "She's going to be a queen," Sabrina said quietly, almost to herself, staring at nothing in particular. "The girl we humiliated in front of the entire pack is going to rule beside the most powerful wolf in the region." "It could be exaggerated," Damon said, though his voice lacked conviction even to his own ears. "Merchants tell all kinds of stories. We shouldn't assume it's entirely true." "And if it is true?" Sabrina asked, finally looking up at him, her eyes reflecting a guilt she had spent weeks trying to bury beneath practical justifications. "What does that make what we did to her, Damon? We destroyed someone destined for greatness, because we were too selfish to wait, too afraid to simply tell her the truth honestly." Damon had no answer for her, guilt settling heavily in his chest as memories of that night replayed themselves with uncomfortable clarity. He remembered Elena's face before he spoke the words of rejection, trusting and open, completely unaware of the betrayal about to unfold. He remembered the way she had run into the forest without looking back, and he wondered, with growing unease, what might have happened to her during those first desperate hours alone in unfamiliar territory. Word of the situation eventually reached the pack elders as well, who gathered in careful discussion about what this news meant for their standing among neighboring territories. If Elena truly had been chosen as fate's queen for a kingdom as powerful as Alaric's, the pack's treatment of her could bring serious consequences, damaged alliances, strained relationships with territories that had once respected their judgment. "We must send someone to apologize," one elder suggested during a private council meeting. "If this bond becomes official, we cannot afford to remain on poor terms with a queen who might one day hold significant influence over regional matters." "Apologize for what exactly?" another elder countered. The rejection ceremony was conducted according to proper tradition. Damon had every right to choose his mate, however unfortunate the circumstances. The debate continued without clear resolution, though the underlying anxiety was unmistakable. A pack that had once felt secure in its judgment, now uncertain about the consequences of decisions made in haste, driven by personal desires rather than careful consideration of broader implications. Damon, meanwhile, found himself increasingly consumed by guilt he had not expected to feel so intensely. He began avoiding conversations about Elena whenever possible, though the topic seemed to follow him regardless, whispered about in every corner of the pack grounds he visited. Sabrina, too, grew increasingly withdrawn, the confident certainty she had carried into their new bond slowly crumbling beneath the weight of what they had done. It was nearly 2 weeks after the initial news reached the pack that Damon made the decision to travel toward Alaric's territory himself, driven by a need to see the truth with his own eyes, to understand what had truly become of the woman he had once promised to build a future alongside. He did not tell Sabrina of his intentions, slipping away early one morning before the pack fully woke, following rumors and directions gathered carefully from travelers who had passed through Alaric's lands. The journey took the better part of 2 days, and by the time he reached the outer boundaries of the fortress territory, exhaustion and uncertainty weighed heavily upon him. Guards intercepted him well before he reached the fortress gates, their expressions immediately wary upon learning his connection to the woman who now resided within their walls under the king's protection. "State your business," one guard demanded, his posture tense, clearly prepared for potential trouble given the recent tensions along the border. "I need to speak with Elena," Damon said, his voice carrying less confidence than he had intended. "I mean no harm, I simply need to understand what has happened, and perhaps offer an apology long overdue." The guards exchanged uncertain glances before agreeing to relay his request, leaving Damon waiting anxiously at the fortress perimeter, while word was sent ahead. He had no way of knowing how Elena would react to his sudden appearance, whether she would refuse to see him entirely, or whether some small part of her still carried enough connection to their shared history to grant him even a brief audience. Inside the fortress, Elena received the news of Damon's arrival with a complicated tangle of emotions she had not expected to feel. Part of her wanted to refuse outright, to protect the fragile peace she had built within these walls from the painful memories his presence would inevitably stir. Yet another part of her, the part still healing from months of unresolved hurt, felt a strange pull toward finally confronting the person who had caused her so much pain. "You don't have to see him," Alaric said gently, finding her in her chamber as she debated the decision, his expression carefully neutral despite the obvious tension he carried at the mention of Damon's name. "I can have him escorted away without ever bringing him before you, if that is what you wish." "I think I need to see him," Elena said slowly, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "Not because I want him back, or because his opinion still matters to me the way it once did, but because I think I need this conversation to truly close that chapter of my life." Alaric studied her carefully, respect evident in his expression despite the obvious protectiveness he felt toward her. "Then I will accompany you," he said firmly. "You will not face him alone." Elena appreciated his offer more than she could adequately express, grateful for the steady support he had shown her since the very first night of her arrival. Together, they made their way toward the fortress gates, where Damon waited nervously, his posture betraying none of the confidence he had once carried during their years together within their old pack. The moment he saw her, Damon's expression shifted through a complicated mixture of relief, guilt, and something that looked almost like awe, as though he was seeing her clearly for the first time despite years of familiarity. "Elena," he said softly, his voice catching slightly, "you look different, stronger somehow." "A great deal has changed since that night," Elena said, her voice steady despite the emotions churning beneath the surface. "What are you doing here, Damon?" "I needed to see for myself," he admitted, glancing briefly toward Alaric before returning his attention to her. "I needed to understand what became of you after everything that happened, and I needed to apologize, properly, for the way I handled things. You deserved so much better than what I gave you that night." Elena studied him for a long moment, searching for the anger she expected to feel, the bitter satisfaction of hearing him finally acknowledge his wrongdoing. Instead, she found only a strange, distant sympathy, the kind reserved for someone whose choices no longer held power over her own happiness. "I forgive you," she said finally, and found that she meant it, the words releasing a tension she had not realized she still carried. "Not because what you did was acceptable, but because holding on to that anger no longer serves the life I am building now. I hope you and Sabrina find whatever happiness you were seeking that night, truly." Damon's eyes widened slightly at her words, clearly having expected a far more painful confrontation. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I did not expect such grace, especially not after everything." "Fate had other plans for me," Elena said simply, glancing briefly toward Alaric. who stood steady and supportive beside her. Plans far beyond anything I could have imagined that night in the forest. Damon nodded slowly, understanding settling into his expression as he looked between the two of them, recognizing the genuine connection that had clearly formed since that fateful night. "I wish you every happiness, Elena," he said sincerely, before turning to make the long journey back toward the pack he had once believed would remain unchanged by the choices made that evening. As he disappeared beyond the fortress boundary, Elena felt a profound sense of closure settle over her, the final threads connecting her to that painful chapter of her life, finally releasing their hold. She turned to Alaric, finding steady warmth in his expression as he watched her carefully. "How do you feel?" he asked gently. "Free," Elena said, and smiled, truly and completely, for the first time since the night everything had changed. With Damon's visit behind her, Elena found herself settling into fortress life, with a newfound sense of purpose she had not expected to discover so completely. The lingering doubts that had followed her since the Mark's revelation began fading, replaced by a growing confidence in the role she was slowly learning to embrace. She spent her mornings training alongside Rosalind, her afternoons studying the customs and history of Alaric's kingdom, and her evenings deepening the bond that had grown steadily between herself and the man fate had chosen for her. Her progress in training became particularly notable within just a few weeks. What had begun as rusty, hesitant movements gradually transformed into something sharper, more confident, as muscle memory from her youth combined with new techniques Rosalind patiently taught her. The other recruits, who had initially watched her with curious skepticism, slowly began to regard her with genuine respect, impressed by her willingness to learn, rather than simply expect deference because of the mark she carried. "You're improving faster than most recruits who have trained here for years," Rosalind commented one afternoon, watching Elena successfully counter a complicated grappling maneuver during their session. "Most people in your position would simply rely on their title. You actually want to earn your place here. Titles don't mean anything if you haven't earned the respect behind them," Elena said, slightly breathless from the exertion. "I learned that lesson the hard way. I don't intend to repeat old mistakes." Word of her dedication spread through the fortress much as news of the Mark once had, though this time carrying a different weight entirely, one built on genuine admiration rather than simple curiosity. Guards who had once watched her with cautious uncertainty began greeting her with warm familiarity. Kitchen staff who prepared her meals began sharing small stories about the kingdom's history, eager to include her in the community she was steadily becoming part of. Alaric noticed these changes as well, watching with quiet pride as Elena transformed from a wounded stranger into someone who commanded genuine respect throughout his territory. One evening, as they walked together through the fortress gardens after a particularly successful training session, he shared something he had kept private since her arrival. "I want to tell you about my past," he said, his voice carrying an unusual vulnerability that immediately caught her attention. "About why I had given up hope of ever finding someone marked by fate." Elena turned to face him fully, sensing the significance of what he was about to share. "I'm listening," she said gently. "My mother died when I was young," Alaric began, his gaze distant as memories surfaced. "My father ruled alone for many years afterward, carrying grief that never fully healed. I watched him struggle with the isolation of leadership without a partner to share the burden, and I convinced myself early on that perhaps fate simply did not intend for wolves in positions like ours to find true partnership." "That must have been incredibly lonely," Elena said softly, understanding now the depth of vulnerability he was revealing to her. "It was," Alaric admitted. "By the time I inherited the throne myself, I had built walls around any hope of finding a fated match. I focused entirely on ruling well, on being the kind of king my people deserved, convincing myself that responsibility alone could fill whatever void remained from never finding genuine partnership. And then I appeared," Elena said quietly, beginning to understand the full weight of what her arrival had meant to him. "And then you appeared," Alaric confirmed, a small, genuine smile breaking through his expression. "Wounded, grieving, entirely unaware of what you carried within you. I felt something shift the moment your scent reached me that first night, though I refused to believe it could truly mean what my instincts suggested." "What changed your mind?" Elena asked. "Watching you," Alaric said simply. "Watching how you handled your grief with such quiet strength. How you defended those recruits without hesitation, despite the danger. How you approached learning our customs with genuine curiosity rather than resentment. I realized that whatever fate had planned, it had chosen someone truly deserving of the role, not simply someone marked by circumstance." Elena felt tears prick at her eyes, moved deeply by his honesty. by the vulnerability he had allowed her to witness. "Thank you for trusting me with that," she said softly. "I know how difficult it must be to speak so openly about such personal pain. You deserve complete honesty," Alaric said, reaching for her hand, "especially given everything you have already endured because of dishonesty and betrayal. I never wish to give you reason to doubt my sincerity." Their bond continued deepening in the weeks that followed, built increasingly on shared vulnerability and genuine partnership rather than simply the pull of fate's mark. Elena began sitting in on more significant council discussions, offering perspectives shaped by her own experiences that Alaric's longtime advisors had not previously considered. Her insight into how decisions affected ordinary pack members, rather than simply strategic or political considerations, brought a valuable new dimension to the kingdom's governance. The advisors, initially skeptical of the newcomer's sudden influence, gradually came to respect her contributions, recognizing the genuine care and thoughtfulness behind her perspectives. Even the most traditional among them began acknowledging that perhaps fate had chosen wisely in selecting someone who understood both strength and compassion in equal measure. One particular council meeting proved especially significant when discussions turned toward a dispute between two smaller packs within the kingdom's broader territory, a disagreement over grazing lands that threatened to escalate into serious conflict if not handled carefully. The advisors debated various strategic approaches, weighing military strength against diplomatic pressure, until Elena offered a perspective that shifted the entire discussion. "Have either pack's actual needs been considered?" she asked, drawing curious glances from the assembled council members, "not just their territorial claims but their genuine needs? Perhaps there's a solution that addresses both, rather than simply determining which pack holds stronger claim." The suggestion led to a more thorough investigation into the dispute's underlying causes, eventually revealing a solution that satisfied both packs by identifying alternative grazing arrangements neither had previously considered. Alaric watched the resolution unfold with quiet pride, recognizing in Elena's approach a wisdom that would serve the kingdom well in the years ahead. "You have a gift for seeing beyond simple strategic calculations," he told her afterward, as they walked together through the corridors following the successful resolution. "Most rulers focus purely on strength and position. You remind everyone that genuine well-being matters just as much." "I learned that lesson through pain," Elena admitted. "Feeling unseen, reduced to simple roles and expectations, taught me to look deeper when trying to understand what people truly need." As autumn deepened into the early signs of winter, the bond between Elena and Alaric had grown into something neither of them could imagine living without. Their formal announcement to the kingdom, made weeks earlier, had been met with genuine celebration throughout the territory. Packs from across Alaric's domain sending well wishes and small gifts to honor the queen fate had chosen for their beloved king. Yet even as this new chapter of Elena's life continued flourishing, quiet undercurrents of concern remained among some of Alaric's council members. Whispers about neighboring territories growing restless, about the pack led by Marcus Thornwood continuing to test boundaries along the eastern border with increasing frequency. Elena sensed this underlying tension whenever she attended council meetings, though Alaric remained careful about how much he shared with her regarding the full scope of these emerging threats. She understood his protective instincts, appreciated the care he took to shield her from unnecessary worry. Yet she also recognized that a true partnership meant facing challenges together rather than being sheltered from difficult truths. It was a conversation she knew they would eventually need to have, though neither of them yet realized how urgently that conversation would soon become necessary. The council meeting that finally addressed the growing threat from Marcus Thornwood's pack took place on a cold morning in early winter, frost coating the fortress grounds outside the tall windows of the council chamber. Elena sat beside Alaric at the long table, having earned her place among the advisors through months of demonstrated wisdom and dedication, though the tension in the room today felt heavier than any previous discussion she had witnessed. "Thornwood has grown bolder," one advisor reported, spreading a map across the table that showed the eastern border marked with several recent incursion points. "What began as minor testing of our defenses has escalated into open challenges. 3 separate incidents in the past 2 weeks alone, each more aggressive than the last." "What does he actually want?" Elena asked, studying the map carefully. "Territory, or something more symbolic?" "Both, likely," Alaric said grimly. "Thornwood has long resented my family's rule over these lands. He views the border territories as ripe for conquest, believing our kingdom has grown complacent under generations of peaceful leadership. And now, with word spreading of your bond with a queen previously rejected by her own pack," another advisor added carefully, glancing toward Elena with evident discomfort at raising the point. "Some believe Thornwood sees this as an opportunity." A chance to paint our kingdom as vulnerable, distracted by matters of the heart rather than focused on defense. Elena felt a flush of anger at the implication, though she recognized the political reality being described rather than any genuine failing on her part or Alaric's. Then we prove him wrong, she said firmly. We show that this bond makes the kingdom stronger, not weaker. Alaric's hand found hers beneath the table, a small gesture of solidarity that steadied her rising frustration. Elena speaks wisely, he said, addressing the full council. We will not allow Thornwood's ambitions to paint our partnership as weakness. If anything, we should use this moment to demonstrate the strength our combined leadership brings to this kingdom. The council debated strategic options for the remainder of the morning, weighing military preparation against diplomatic outreach, though the underlying consensus grew increasingly clear. Thornwood's pact intended to test the kingdom's resolve directly, and diplomatic solutions alone would likely prove insufficient given his escalating aggression. That evening, as Elena and Alaric retreated to the privacy of his chambers following the lengthy council session, she finally voiced the concern that had been building throughout the day's discussions. "You've been protecting me from the full scope of this threat," she said, watching his expression carefully. "I understand why, but I need you to trust me with difficult truths, Alaric. A true partnership means facing challenges together, not being sheltered from them." Alaric sighed, running a hand through his hair as he considered her words. "You're right," he admitted. "I have been trying to shield you from worry, perhaps more than was fair given everything you have already proven yourself capable of handling. Thornwood is dangerous, Elena. He has spent years building alliances with smaller packs along our borders, promising them greater autonomy if they support his eventual challenge for control of these territories." "How serious is the threat truly?" Elena asked. "Serious enough that I believe conflict is now inevitable," Alaric said honestly. "Thornwood will not stop testing our borders through minor incursions forever. Eventually he will attempt something far more direct, likely believing that our recent focus on matters of succession and bonding has left us distracted and unprepared." Elena absorbed this information with a steady calm that surprised even herself, months of training and growing confidence within the kingdom, having prepared her for exactly this kind of difficult conversation. "Then we prepare properly," she said. "Not just militarily, but by strengthening the alliances that remain loyal to your rule, by demonstrating to smaller packs along the border that supporting Thornwood offers less security than remaining loyal to established leadership." Alaric looked at her with evident admiration, recognizing the strategic wisdom behind her suggestion. "You continue to surprise me," he said softly. "Every day, I find new reasons to be grateful that fate led you to my doorstep that terrible night." Over the following weeks, Elena threw herself into preparations alongside Alaric and his council, traveling personally to several border packs to reaffirm alliances and demonstrate the kingdom's continued strength and stability. Her presence at these meetings proved unexpectedly valuable, smaller pack leaders responding warmly to a queen who had risen from rejection and hardship rather than simply inheriting privilege through fortunate birth. "She understands what it means to struggle," one border pack leader remarked to Alaric during one such visit, watching Elena speak with genuine warmth to the pack's younger members. "That understanding will serve your kingdom well in difficult times ahead." Despite these successful diplomatic efforts, tensions along the eastern border continued escalating throughout the following month. Thornwood's incursions grew bolder, testing not just physical boundaries but the patience of Alaric's guards, who struggled to maintain restraint despite increasingly aggressive provocations from the rival pack. The situation finally reached its breaking point on a bitterly cold evening, when scouts returned to the fortress with urgent news that could no longer be ignored. Thornwood's forces had gathered in significant numbers near the eastern border, far more than any previous incursion, suggesting preparation for something far beyond simple testing of defenses. "This is it," Alaric said grimly, studying the scouts' reports alongside his full council, Elena seated beside him, with the same authority she had earned through months of dedicated service to the kingdom. "Thornwood intends to make his move soon, likely within the next few days given the scale of forces he has assembled." "What's our best course of action?" Elena asked, studying the strategic maps spread across the table. "We cannot simply wait for him to strike first," one advisor argued. "Doing so risks catastrophic losses if his forces prove as substantial as scouts suggest. But striking first risks appearing as the aggressor to neutral packs watching this conflict unfold," another advisor countered. "We need Thornwood to be clearly seen as the one breaking peace, not us." The debate continued late into the night, various strategies weighed and discarded, until Elena offered a suggestion that combined careful diplomatic positioning with necessary military preparation. We send a formal envoy demanding Thornwood withdraw his forces immediately, she proposed. Publicly, so that neutral pacts witness our attempt at peaceful resolution. If he refuses, as I suspect he will, given his gathered forces, his refusal becomes clear justification for our response. Meanwhile, we quietly prepare our own forces to respond swiftly, the moment his refusal becomes evident. Alaric nodded slowly, recognizing the wisdom in her balanced approach. This positions us favorably regardless of his response, he said. Peaceful resolution if he complies, clear justification for defensive action if he does not. The council agreed to this strategy, and the following morning, a formal envoy departed toward Thornwood's territory carrying Alaric's demand for immediate withdrawal. Elena watched them leave with quiet apprehension, understanding that the coming days would likely determine not just the kingdom's immediate safety, but the broader stability of the region for years to come. As anticipated, Thornwood's response arrived within 2 days, delivered not through diplomatic channels but through a direct message carried by one of his own scouts, brazen and defiant in tone. "Tell your king that Marcus Thornwood answers to no one," the message read, according to the returning envoy who relayed its contents to the assembled council. "These border territories will soon belong to those strong enough to claim them. Your king's newfound queen changes nothing about the inevitable outcome of what is coming." The direct reference to Elena sent a ripple of anger through the council chamber, Alaric's expression darkening with barely restrained fury at the implied threat toward someone he had come to cherish so deeply. "He seeks to provoke us," Elena said calmly, though her own pulse raced at the personal nature of the threat. "We cannot let his words dictate our response. We proceed with the plan already established." Alaric looked at her with renewed respect, steadying his own anger in favor of the strategic composure their situation demanded. "You're right," he said. "We prepare our forces immediately. Thornwood has made his intentions clear enough. We will not wait passively for his attack." The following days brought intense preparation throughout the fortress, guards drilling with heightened urgency, supplies gathered and organized for what increasingly appeared to be inevitable conflict. Elena found herself drawn into every aspect of these preparations, her strategic insight proving valuable even in matters of military logistics that extended well beyond her original combat training. Rosalind, who had become not just a friend but a trusted confidant throughout Elena's time within the fortress, found her checking supply inventories late one evening, exhaustion evident in her posture despite her continued dedication to the preparations at hand. "You should rest," Rosalind said gently. "Even queens need sleep, especially with what's likely coming." "I can't rest knowing what's at stake," Elena admitted, setting down the inventory list she had been reviewing. "This kingdom has given me everything, Rosalind. A home, purpose, genuine partnership I never expected to find again after everything with Damon. I won't sit idle while Thornwood threatens to destroy it." "Then rest so you can fight for it properly when the time comes," Rosalind said practically, though warmth colored her tone. "Exhaustion serves no one well in the challenges ahead." Elena eventually heeded her friend's advice, though sleep proved elusive that night, her mind churning with strategic considerations and quiet fears about what confrontation with Thornwood's forces might ultimately bring. She found Alaric awake as well when she finally sought him out near midnight, and standing at the same wall overlooking the forest where they had first confessed their growing feelings for one another months earlier. "Can't sleep either?" she asked softly, coming to stand beside him. "Too much weighing on my mind," Alaric admitted. "Not just strategic concerns, but fear for your safety, Elena. Thornwood specifically referenced you in his message. I cannot ignore the possibility that he intends to target you directly during whatever confrontation lies ahead." "I won't hide away while this kingdom fights for its survival," Elena said firmly. "I've spent months earning my place here, training alongside your guards, learning what it truly means to lead. I refuse to simply disappear into safety while others risk everything on my behalf." Alaric studied her for a long moment, clearly torn between his protective instincts and his recognition of the strength and capability she had demonstrated repeatedly since her arrival. "I cannot ask you to hide," he said finally. "Not after everything you have shown me about your courage and dedication. But please, promise me you will exercise caution. Whatever comes in the days ahead, I cannot bear the thought of losing you now. Not after everything fate brought us through to find each other." "I promise," Elena said softly, reaching up to gently touch his face, her fingers tracing the tension evident along his jaw. "But you must promise me the same, Alaric. This kingdom needs its king just as much as it needs its queen." They stood together in comfortable silence for a long while afterward, drawing strength from each other's presence, as the fortress around them prepared for whatever confrontation the coming days would bring. neither of them yet fully aware of just how decisive that confrontation would prove to be for the future of the entire region. The attack came at dawn 3 days later, exactly as Alaric's scouts had predicted, Thornwood's forces emerging from the eastern tree line in numbers that confirmed weeks of careful, secret preparation. The fortress horns sounded their warning across the grounds, guards rushing to defensive positions that had been meticulously planned and practiced throughout the preceding days. Elena stood beside Alaric at the fortress gates, both of them dressed for battle, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and fierce determination, as she watched the approaching forces cross the open fields toward their walls. Rosalind commanded a defensive unit nearby, her expression grim but resolute, while advisors coordinated the broader strategic response from positions throughout the fortress grounds. "Remember the plan," Alaric said, his voice steady despite the tension evident in his posture. "We hold the gates as long as possible, drawing Thornwood's forces into positions where our archers can inflict maximum damage before any direct confrontation becomes necessary." "I remember," Elena confirmed, gripping the weapon she had trained with extensively over the preceding weeks, though nothing could fully prepare her for the reality of what was about to unfold. Thornwood's forces reached the fortress walls within the hour, their leader unmistakable at the front of the advancing line, his expression carrying the same arrogant confidence Elena remembered from the brief confrontation months earlier when she had defended the young recruits. He called out a challenge as his forces approached, his voice carrying across the open ground with unmistakable menace. "Alaric," Thornwood shouted, "these lands should belong to those strong enough to hold them. Surrender your throne now, and perhaps I will show mercy to your kingdom. Continue resisting, and I promise no such kindness. These lands have belonged to my family for generations," Alaric called back, his voice carrying the full authority of his position. "You have no claim here beyond ambition and arrogance. Withdraw now, or face the consequences of your reckless aggression." Thornwood's response came not in words but in action, his forces surging forward against the fortress defenses with coordinated precision that spoke of careful planning. Alaric's guards responded immediately, archers releasing volleys that thinned the advancing lines, though Thornwood's forces pressed forward with determined ferocity despite mounting losses. The battle that followed tested every ounce of preparation the fortress had undertaken in recent weeks. Elena found herself fighting alongside Rosalind near the eastern gate, defending against wave after wave of attackers with skills she had honed through months of dedicated training. Her earlier fears about her own capability faded beneath the immediate demands of survival and defense, instinct and training combining to guide her movements through the chaos surrounding her. "Watch your left," Rosalind called out during a particularly intense exchange, and Elena reacted instantly, deflecting an attack that would have otherwise found its mark, her gratitude for months of careful training never more evident than in that critical moment. Meanwhile, Alaric commanded the broader defense with the same steady authority Elena had come to admire since her arrival, coordinating movements across multiple fronts as Thornwood's forces attempted various strategies to breach the fortress defenses. His experience as king, honed through years of careful leadership, proved invaluable as the battle stretched from morning into afternoon, neither side gaining decisive advantage despite the intensity of the ongoing conflict. It was during a lull in the fighting, as both sides regrouped for what would clearly be a final decisive confrontation, that Thornwood made his move directly toward Elena, apparently recognizing that targeting the queen personally might prove more effective than continuing his broader assault against the fortress defenses. He appeared suddenly near the section where Elena had been fighting alongside Rosalind, his expression carrying dark satisfaction at finding her separated momentarily from the main defensive formation. "The rejected wolf who somehow became a queen," he sneered, circling her with predatory intent. "Let us see if fate's mark grants you any true strength, or if you remain as vulnerable as the night your own pack cast you aside." "Fate gave me far more than a mark," Elena said, refusing to let his words shake her composure despite the fear that flickered through her at facing him directly. "It gave me purpose, strength, and people worth fighting for. Something your ambition will never understand." Thornwood lunged forward, testing her defenses with an aggressive strike that Elena barely managed to deflect, months of training proving essential as she countered his attack with movements that surprised him with their precision and confidence. Their confrontation drew attention from nearby fighters, both sides pausing momentarily to witness the direct clash between the aggressor and the kingdom's newly claimed queen. The fight that followed tested Elena beyond anything she had previously experienced, Thornwood's raw strength and years of combat experience nearly overwhelming her despite her improved skills. She drew on every lesson Rosalind had taught her, every moment of quiet determination that had carried her from rejected outcast to capable defender of a kingdom she had come to genuinely love. Just as Thornwood's superior strength began pressing her toward a dangerous disadvantage, Alaric arrived, having fought his way across the battlefield upon realizing his queen faced direct danger. His intervention allowed Elena precious seconds to recover her footing, and together, fighting in coordinated tandem built from months of growing partnership, they turned the confrontation decisively against Thornwood. "Your ambition ends here," Alaric declared, as their combined efforts finally overwhelmed Thornwood's defenses, forcing him to yield rather than face complete defeat. Recognizing the futility of continuing his assault given the decisive turn of the battle, Thornwood called for his remaining forces to withdraw, retreating back toward his own territory in clear defeat, his ambitions for conquest thoroughly crushed by the combined strength of Alaric's kingdom and the queen fate had chosen to stand beside him. The aftermath of the battle brought both relief and somber reflection as the fortress tended to the wounded and assessed the toll the conflict had taken. Thankfully, Alaric's forces had suffered relatively few serious casualties given the intensity of the fighting, a testament to the careful preparation and strategic planning that had guided their defense throughout the confrontation. Elena moved through the makeshift healing stations set up within the fortress grounds, offering comfort and assistance wherever needed, her presence bringing genuine reassurance to guards and recruits who had witnessed her direct confrontation with Thornwood himself. Word of her courage during the battle spread quickly throughout the fortress, transforming whatever lingering doubts remained about her worthiness as queen into unequivocal respect and admiration. "You fought well today," Rosalind said, finding Elena tending to a young recruit's minor injuries later that evening, exhaustion evident on both their faces after the long day of conflict. "Thornwood clearly underestimated you, and he paid for that mistake." "I couldn't have managed without everything you taught me," Elena said honestly, grateful beyond words for the friendship and mentorship Rosalind had provided since her earliest days within the fortress. "None of this would have been possible without your patience and guidance." That evening, as the fortress settled into the quiet aftermath of victory, Alaric called for a formal gathering of the entire kingdom's population, who could travel to witness what he intended to announce publicly, a celebration not just of their successful defense against Thornwood's aggression, but of the partnership that had proven so essential to that victory. Standing before the assembled crowd within the fortress courtyard, torches casting warm light across faces marked by exhaustion and relief in equal measure, Alaric took Elena's hand and addressed his people with words that would echo throughout the kingdom for years to come. "Months ago, fate brought a stranger to our borders, wounded and grieving, having endured betrayal from those who should have cherished her most," he began, his voice carrying clearly across the silent courtyard. "That stranger proved herself not simply through the marks she carried, but through her actions, her wisdom, her courage, and her unwavering dedication to this kingdom and its people." Elena felt tears gathering as she listened to his words, overwhelmed by the journey that had brought her from that terrible night of rejection to this moment of genuine acceptance and belonging. "Today, she fought alongside us against those who sought to destroy everything we have built together," Alaric continued. "She proved, beyond any doubt, that fate chose wisely in marking her as this kingdom's true queen. I present to you all, formally and completely, Elena, rightful queen of these lands, my equal in every measure of strength, wisdom, and leadership." The crowd erupted into genuine celebration, cheers echoing across the fortress grounds as Elena stood beside Alaric, finally, completely embracing the role fate had chosen for her, no longer burdened by uncertainty or doubt about her worthiness. The rejection that had once shattered her sense of self had, through fate's strange design, led her toward a purpose and partnership far greater than anything she had imagined possible that terrible night beside the fire pit. In the weeks that followed, peace gradually returned to the kingdom's borders, Thornwood's defeated ambitions serving as clear warning to any who might consider similar challenges against Alaric's rule. Elena continued growing into her role as queen, her influence extending beyond simple ceremonial duties into genuine leadership that shaped the kingdom's policies and priorities for years to come. She thought sometimes of her old pack, of Damon and Sabrina building their life together far from the kingdom she now called home, and found that the bitterness she had once carried had transformed entirely into quiet gratitude for the painful path that had ultimately led her toward genuine happiness. Fate, she had come to understand, rarely followed the paths people expected, often working through pain and betrayal to reveal purposes far greater than anyone could anticipate. On a quiet evening months after the battle, as winter began giving way to the first signs of spring across the fortress grounds, Elena stood once more at the familiar wall, overlooking the forest. Alaric beside her, as had become their comfortable habit during peaceful moments between the demands of ruling their kingdom together. "Do you ever think about that night?" Alaric asked softly, referring to the rejection ceremony that had first set Elena's journey into motion. "The night everything changed for you?" "Every day," Elena admitted, leaning into his steady presence beside her. "But not with the pain I once carried. Now I think of it as the beginning of everything truly meaningful in my life. Without that rejection, I never would have found my way to you, to this kingdom, to the purpose I now carry with such pride." "Fate has a strange way of finding its path," Alaric said, echoing sentiments they had shared many times throughout their journey together. "Even through pain, even through betrayal, it led you exactly where you were always meant to be." Elena smiled, turning to look at the man who had become not just her partner in rule, but her truest companion in every sense that mattered. "I wouldn't change a single moment of that journey," she said softly, "not if it meant losing what we have built together now." They remained together at that wall as the sun set behind the fortress, casting warm golden light across the kingdom they now ruled as true equals, their bond forged not simply through fate's mysterious mark, but through genuine partnership, mutual respect, and a love that had proven strong enough to weather even the most difficult challenges. The rejection that had once seemed like the end of everything Elena valued had instead become the beginning of a life far richer and more meaningful than she could have ever imagined, a testament to the truth that sometimes the greatest heartbreaks lead toward the most extraordinary destinies.